It's a curious human habit, isn't it? This relentless drive to map out every step, to predict every turn, to essentially tame the wildness of existence. We speak of managing our lives, our careers, our emotions, as if these were unruly beasts to be brought to heel. But have you ever paused, truly paused, to consider the hidden cost of this ceaseless effort? This deep-seated craving for absolute command, not just over the world around us, but over the very landscape of our inner lives? We desperately seek the comfort of knowing, the reassurance of a future that unfolds according to our meticulously drawn blueprints. We yearn to define ourselves with sharp, unwavering clarity, to understand our purpose and destination as if life were a solved equation. Society, in its myriad forms, often reinforces this quest. It hands us templates for success, for happiness, for a well-lived life, and these templates are almost always built on foundations of certainty and predictability. Yet, the uncomfortable truth, the one we often sidestep, is that this relentless pursuit of guaranteed outcomes, this addiction to knowing, can paradoxically steer us further away from the very serenity we believe it will provide. Perhaps you feel it, that undercurrent of exhaustion from wrestling with the inherently unpredictable, that frustration when carefully laid plans are scattered by the merest gust of unforeseen circumstance. You might be navigating a persistent fog of unease, where every unknown variable feels like a looming storm, every unanswered question a personal failing. But what if the uncertainty itself isn't the adversary? What if the true source of our disquiet is our determined resistance to it? Centuries ago, a remarkable thinker, Michel de Montaigne, grappled with this very notion. In an era hungry for unshakable doctrines and grand, all-encompassing philosophies, Montaigne chose a different path. He turned his gaze inward, exploring the shifting, often contradictory terrain of his own mind, his own experiences. He chronicled his doubts, his fears, his inconsistencies, not as a man who had conquered them, but as one learning to navigate life more skillfully with them. His revelation, radical for its time and profoundly relevant for ours, was that genuine peace might not lie in finding all the answers, but in cultivating a new, more accepting relationship with the questions themselves. This is an invitation to explore that alternative. It's a call to consider a way of being that is perhaps less about forceful direction and more about courageous adaptation. Through the lens of Montaigne's enduring insights, we can see that when we cease our struggle against the inherent unpredictability of life, a profound shift can occur. The tight grip of anxiety may loosen, the relentless pressure to perform and predict can ease, and life, perhaps for the first time in a long while, can begin to feel less like a battle to be won, and more like a dance to be savored. This transformation, however, isn't about changing the world outside, it's an internal recalibration. It begins the moment you entertain the possibility of letting go, of relinquishing the illusion that you can or must orchestrate everything. It starts with a simple, yet profoundly liberating admission. I don't know, and that is perfectly all right. Montaigne was not a philosopher in the conventional mold, building elaborate systems or preaching from a pedestal of supposed enlightenment. His laboratory was his own life, his study filled with the quiet hum of introspection. There, surrounded by the wisdom of ages, he embarked on the daring project of examining the most elusive and fluid subject of all, himself. His writings, his essays, are not didactic pronouncements. They are more like intimate conversations, mirrors reflecting the complex, ever-changing nature of human experience. He didn't aim to convert his readers to a particular viewpoint, but rather to spark their own contemplation, their own honest self-inquiry, encouraging them to look within, perhaps even with a touch of fear, but to look nonetheless. While his contemporaries often chased universal, absolute truths, Montaigne found wisdom in acknowledging the limits of his own understanding. The more he experienced life, the more he recognized that his grasp on the world, and even on his own inner workings, was partial, incomplete. And in this, he found not a failing, but a peculiar kind of liberation. His famous question, "Que sais-je?" What do I know? Wasn't a rhetorical flourish or a cry of despair, but a genuine starting point. For Montaigne, acknowledging ignorance wasn't intellectual surrender. It was the shedding of a heavy burden, the burden of pretense, of maintaining a facade of certainty, of always needing to be right, unassailable, and fully formed. Our contemporary world often seems to run counter to this humility. We're immersed in a culture that frequently demands instant opinions, unwavering stances, and certainties wielded like weapons. Montaigne, however, offers a gentle counter-narrative, the permission to be simply human with all our inherent messiness, before we rush to align ourselves with rigid ideologies. He believed that our vulnerabilities, our hesitations, our internal contradictions were not flaws to be eradicated, but vital components of our aliveness. And perhaps this is precisely the message your own weary spirit needs to hear. That you don't need to project an image of unshakable certainty to be valued, that you don't need to possess all the answers to move forward, that being a work in progress is not just acceptable, but essential. Montaigne gave himself the grace to evolve. He openly acknowledged his shifting perspectives, admitting that yesterday's conviction might not withstand today's scrutiny. He understood the mind's natural fluidity, its capacity to adapt, learn, and transform. Instead of resisting this inherent motion, he embraced it with curiosity, with a touch of wry humor, and with a sense of wonder. He saw that a fulfilling life wasn't about imposing fixed ideas onto the world, but about navigating its complexities with an open mind and a receptive heart. This is why his voice remains so resonant today. In an age of amplified pronouncements, he speaks in a quieter, more contemplative tone. Amidst the clamor for hard certainties, he champions the gentle strength of doubt. If you find yourself feeling adrift, weighed down by the expectation to be a paragon of stability and unwavering resolve, perhaps what you yearn for isn't more direction, but more freedom. The freedom to change, the freedom to not know, the freedom to simply be. But Montaigne doesn't just invite us to embrace doubt. He also illuminates the suffering born from our attempts to flee from it. The more intensely we try to impose our will upon the unpredictable currents of life, the more turmoil we inadvertently create. This silent anguish arising from the desperate scramble to control what is fundamentally uncontrollable is a central theme we must confront. Consider the enormous energy poured into steering events, into managing perceptions, into ensuring outcomes that are, by their very nature, beyond our absolute command. Tomorrow's developments, the reactions of others, the trajectory of our careers, the processes of our own bodies, even our fleeting feelings. We try to micromanage them all, often extending this impulse to realms far outside our actual influence. And the more tenaciously we clutch the reins, the more life seems to writhe and escape our grasp. It's akin to trying to hold a fistful of sand. The tighter your grip, the faster the grains slip through your fingers. Have you ever truly tallied the cost of this endeavor? This obsession with control is not merely fatiguing. It is a corrosive force. It molds us into prisoners of our own making, shackled by unrealistic expectations, perpetually scanning the horizon for potential disruptions. This state has a name we all recognize: anxiety. At its heart, anxiety is the fear of what we cannot predict, the desperate craving for guarantees in a world that inherently offers none. Many exist in this state of constant vigilance, attempting to anticipate every bend in the road, believing this foresight will somehow shield them from life's inevitable emotional collisions. But Montaigne intuited what modern psychology has since affirmed. To live in a constant state of attempting to predict and preempt the future is to live in a perpetual state of conflict with reality itself. You see, our suffering often stems not directly from the events that befall us, but from our vigorous, often futile struggle against those events. It's the insistent desire for life to conform to our preferences, to be something other than what it is. It's the denial of the natural, sometimes turbulent, flow of existence. Montaigne addressed this with a refreshing candor. He accepted his own pains, his losses, his periods of uncertainty, not as aberrations to be swiftly eradicated, but as inseparable threads in the rich tapestry of being. In doing so, he unburdened himself from the exhausting task of resisting everything. Observe those around you, or perhaps even within yourself. Are not the most controlling individuals often the most visibly tense, the most easily exhausted, the most rigidly inflexible? They resist relaxation, fearing that any lapse in their vigilance will invite disaster. Yet, this belief system doesn't offer protection. It constructs a prison. Montaigne, in stark contrast, advocated for a kind of conscious surrender, not a passive defeated resignation, but a courageous acknowledgement that the world does not bend to our will, and that our minds must learn to flow with its currents rather than attempting to dam them. Herein lies a profound irony. The more desperately you seek control, the more acutely you experience frustration, and the more frustrated you become, the more convinced you are that you need even more control. It's a self-perpetuating cycle that can easily consume us, leaving in its wake a strained body, a depleted mind, and a spirit bereft of peace. Montaigne illuminates an alternative path. Living well isn't about achieving total command, but about mastering the art of coexisting gracefully with what remains beyond our control. But how does one translate this into tangible practice? How do we learn to navigate the unpredictable without becoming unmoored? The answer lies in Montaigne's own approach to life, specifically in the dedicated practice of self-reflection. Not as a detached clinical analysis, but as a profound ritual of deep, attentive inner listening. While the world around him often clamored for unshakable verities, Montaigne often retreated into the quietude of his library, his tower, to observe the intricate workings within himself. What he encountered there wasn't instant enlightenment or neatly categorized emotions, but a vibrant, sometimes chaotic interplay of contradictions, fears, half-formed desires, and impulses that defied easy explanation. All those inner experiences that many of us prefer to conceal or disown. He chose to meet them directly, not with judgment, but with an open, receptive curiosity. Montaigne's genius wasn't in formulating grand theories about the human psyche, but in his courage to transform himself into a living laboratory of the human condition. His own existence became his primary field of study, and his essays, the candid records of his explorations. In these writings, he doesn't adopt the stance of a teacher imparting wisdom from on high, but rather that of a fellow traveler sharing his ongoing process of discovery. He thinks aloud on the page, inviting the reader to engage in a similar journey of self-exploration. His aim wasn't to mold minds to a specific doctrine, but to liberate them. By narrating his own doubts, his most private urges, his shifts in opinion, and even his moments of perceived weakness, Montaigne offers a revolutionary insight. You do not need to be perpetually correct or flawlessly consistent. You simply need to be authentically present with yourself. This discipline of sustained self-observation, undertaken without pretense or self-censure, is one of the most potent forms of self-knowledge available. A word of caution, however. Observing yourself is not an invitation to self-flagellation or harsh criticism. It is rather learning to look inward with unflinching honesty, yet also with profound compassion. It's about noticing when you are attempting to deceive yourself, when you are feigning knowledge you don't possess, when you are straining to uphold an image that no longer truly reflects who you are. Montaigne wrote, in part, to free himself from such internal fetters. He famously embraced the full spectrum of human experience, suggesting that nothing human was alien to him. In essence, every thought, feeling, or impulse that resides within you, no matter how perplexing or uncomfortable, is a legitimate aspect of your being. And what is the most empowering outcome of this practice? It dissolves the corrosive power of shame. As you begin to observe yourself with genuine sincerity, you realize that a significant portion of your distress arises from the striving to embody an idealized version of yourself, to adhere to some unrealistic benchmark of emotional, intellectual, or moral perfection. Montaigne gently reminds us that we are not static monuments carved from marble. We are dynamic, mutable, flawed, and exquisitely imperfect beings. The simplicity and peace we often crave begin to emerge when we cease our internal warfare against our own intrinsic nature. Herein lies a crucial insight. This acceptance is not a passive surrender to our shortcomings. On the contrary, it is the essential first step toward any authentic and lasting transformation. For only those who can see themselves with clarity can hope to change in ways that are true to their core. Only those who dare to embrace their own shadows can genuinely walk toward their own light. But there is another vital dimension to this journey. Even if you cultivate the habit of self-observation, you must still contend with an unavoidable reality: change. Nothing within you, nothing in others, and nothing in the world remains static. Until we fully grasp this truth and learn to live in harmony with it, suffering will remain our unwelcome companion. This constant flux is what we must now explore. Most of us, at some level, operate as if life should proceed along a predictable, linear trajectory. We harbor a subtle expectation that one day, upon acquiring a certain level of knowledge, achieving a particular stability, or attaining a specific measure of success, everything will finally click into place. We imagine a destination where change ceases, where emotions stabilize into a placid calm, where doubts evaporate, and where everything makes permanent sense. This pervasive fantasy, often subtly marketed by various societal institutions, is precisely what creates a chasm between ourselves, reality, and genuine peace. Montaigne perceived this with exceptional lucidity. He recognized that life, in its very essence, is a process of constant pulsation and flow. Our thoughts shift, our bodies age, relationships evolve, people enter and leave our lives, our desires morph, and even our most cherished certainties can dissolve over time. Nothing is fixed, nothing is guaranteed, nothing is definitive. To attempt to live as if it were otherwise, as if life should be predictable, unchanging, and entirely within our control, is to cultivate fertile ground for frustration, suffering, and eventual emotional exhaustion. Change isn't an anomaly, it is the very fabric of existence. The more vehemently we resist its current, the more rigid, embittered, and disconnected from the present moment we become. Montaigne accepted his own internal shifts and external transformations as integral to his humanity. He understood that occasional inconsistency was often a sign of growth, that altering one's opinion could be an act of courage, and that releasing an old belief, even for another that was itself uncertain, was a step toward greater clarity. He provocatively suggested that unwavering constancy might be a characteristic of minds that are less alive, more mechanical. For him, living well wasn't about clinging desperately to a fixed identity, but about engaging in a graceful, responsive dance with impermanence. Consider how many of your deepest anxieties are tethered to the possibility of change. The fear of losing a loved one, the fear of job insecurity, the fear of things simply not staying the same. But what if, instead of resisting these transformations, you began to embrace them as Montaigne did, as natural, inevitable parts of life's unfolding? What if you reframed each transition not as a personal failure or a catastrophic loss, but as an opportunity for evolution? Accepting change isn't about passive resignation or condoning misfortune. It's about ceasing the exhausting battle against the fundamental flow of reality. It's learning to ride the waves rather than attempting to build dams against the ocean. The lightness and ease that so many of us seek don't arise from a forced artificial stability, but from cultivating inner flexibility, the capacity to let go, to adapt, to be reborn in new circumstances. Montaigne understood this profound truth long before our modern anxieties took their current shape, and perhaps you are beginning to sense its power now. However, simply recognizing that change is natural doesn't automatically resolve all our difficulties. It's one thing to understand intellectually, it's another to know how to navigate this inherent instability from within, how to anchor one's being amidst doubt, occasional chaos, and the persistent unknown without succumbing to overwhelm. This is where philosophy must become practical, where Montaigne offers us not just ideas, but a way of being. He guides us toward the construction of mental habits, of internal rituals that can help us live more skillfully and peacefully with uncertainty. Philosophy is of little use if it doesn't touch the raw, lived experiences of our days. Montaigne knew this intimately. His essays are not abstract intellectual exercises. They are existential tools. He didn't write to dazzle scholars, but to explore how one might better cope with the fear of death, with periods of sadness, with pervasive insecurity, with the aging of the body, and with the faltering of the mind. Perhaps the most enduring gift Montaigne bequeathed us is precisely this: the understanding that thinking, true reflective thinking, is an act of profound self-care, an act of survival. To reflect deeply on one's own life is to learn to live it with greater courage, wisdom, and diminished suffering. But how specifically does one cultivate this art of living with uncertainty? It's not a one-time decision, but an ongoing practice, a re-education of the mind. This requires a certain kind of discipline, not the rigid, punitive discipline of a drill sergeant, but the gentle, consistent commitment you might bring to tending a precious garden, a commitment to your own inner freedom. Living well with uncertainty is a daily, even hourly exercise. Here are some Montaignian principles, reimagined for our contemporary lives, that can genuinely transform your relationship with the unpredictable. First, actively befriend your doubts and question your certainties. Whenever you find yourself absolutely unshakably convinced of something, especially about complex matters or future outcomes, pause. Observe that feeling of certainty. Reflect on its origins. Absolute certainty is often a subtle mask for underlying fear, a defense mechanism against the inherent discomfort of not knowing. Montaigne consistently did this, interrogating even his most established thoughts, not from a place of chronic insecurity, but from a position of genuine wisdom. He knew that the most perilous thought is often the one that refuses to be re-examined. Second, establish a ritual of self-dialogue, perhaps through writing. It doesn't matter if it's a formal journal, a letter you'll never send, or simply scattered notes. The act of translating your internal landscape, your thoughts, anxieties, hopes, into written words is a powerful way to bring clarity to what troubles or elates you. Montaigne filled hundreds of pages with his reflections, not out of narcissism, but as a means to understand himself, to bring a semblance of order to his internal chaos, and to make his own mind a more habitable space. Third, embrace impermanence as a fundamental organizing principle of life. Make plans by all means, set intentions, but also cultivate the wisdom to gracefully release or adapt those plans when life inevitably introduces new variables, because it always will. True strength lies in flexibility. Instead of building your sense of security on the fragile foundations of fixed certainties, learn to move with agility, to adapt, reconfigure, and even reinvent yourself and your approach as circumstances shift. Montaigne wisely observed that true wisdom involves knowing how to change with the things that change. Fourth, cultivate a sense of humor, especially regarding your own human frailties and foibles. Yes, learn to laugh at yourself. Montaigne didn't take himself with an overwhelming seriousness, and this lightness is part of what made his insights so profound. He could chuckle at his own inconsistencies, gently mock his fears, and view his own vanities with an ironic eye. Humor is a potent antidote to being crushed by your own unrealistic demands and expectations. It's a way of acknowledging, I am wonderfully fallibly human, and that's perfectly all right. Finally, deliberately carve out moments of quiet solitude to simply be with yourself, without the constant barrage of external distractions. No phone, no relentless stimulation, just presence. Solitude was Montaigne's cherished ally, not for the purpose of social isolation, but for achieving inner clarity. It is often in the silence that you begin to hear what you truly think and feel beneath the noise of daily life. It is in the pause that the mind has a chance to reorganize itself. And it is in that sacred internal space that uncertainty can cease to feel like a menacing threat and begin to transform into fertile ground for new insights and fresh possibilities. All these practices, however potent, derive their ultimate value from the profound freedom they cultivate, the freedom to be authentically who you are, without the crushing need to possess all the answers, the freedom to live with a lighter spirit, even when the path ahead is unclear, the freedom that comes from truly belonging to yourself. And it is this theme, the inner freedom born from the acceptance of doubt and uncertainty, that forms the culminating insight of Montaigne's wisdom. He didn't just want us to survive the inevitable chaos of life. He wanted us to learn to dance with it. In the grand scheme, everything you've strived so intensely to control was, from the very outset, largely beyond your absolute command. Life was never designed to fit neatly into your emotional spreadsheets, nor was it meant to obediently follow your idealized timelines. People will inevitably act in ways you don't expect. Plans will encounter unforeseen obstacles. Feelings will shift like the tides, and none of this is an indication of failure. It is, quite simply, the inherent nature of existence. Montaigne perceived this with an almost startling clarity. He understood that our suffering arises not so much from change itself, but from our determined resistance to it, from our refusal to accept that life is fundamentally about flow, not fixed form. When you genuinely begin to embrace uncertainty, something profound shifts, not necessarily in the external world, but within the landscape of your own being. Rigidity starts to soften, anxiety loses its suffocating grip, and you cease the exhausting battle against what is, beginning instead to flow more harmoniously with what presents itself. This isn't resignation. It is the hallmark of wisdom. It is emotional maturity. It is ultimately freedom. The freedom to live without the immense burden of needing to understand everything. The freedom from the compulsion to attach a definitive label to every feeling, a precise explanation for every pain, a guaranteed right path for every choice. Life doesn't demand perfection from you. It simply asks for your presence, your willingness to engage with it as it truly is. The simplicity we so often yearn for is not found in external circumstances, not in a life miraculously devoid of problems, not in an impeccably organized routine, nor in a future meticulously planned down to the last detail. It resides in the quiet moment you grant yourself permission not to know, in the instance you can say with genuine honesty and courage, "I don't have all the answers, and that is okay." For it is within that space of profound humility that true peace is often born, a peace that isn't dependent on fleeting circumstances, a peace that emanates from deep within. Montaigne taught us that by accepting our inherent limitations and our inevitable ignorance, we become not less but more fully human, and in doing so, profoundly more free. If you have journeyed this far, if these reflections have struck a chord within you, it is likely because a part of you is ready to release the heavy mantle of control, ready to breathe a little more deeply, ready to live with a greater measure of authenticity. So, take a moment now to consider what within you still braces against the unknown. What sensations arise when you peer into the future and find no clear, guaranteed answers? This ongoing exploration is powerful. This path of self-discovery, once embarked upon, is yours to continue. You've already taken a significant step by considering these ideas. Keep going, for the journey toward a more peaceful coexistence with uncertainty is one of the most rewarding you can undertake. Thanks for watching. If this resonated, please like this video and subscribe to stay updated. I look forward to continuing this journey with you. Until next time, take care and be present.